remind folks that because we have so many people zooming in at once, and because of the logistics of us not being able to be in the room together, we're going to try this. And we have we have 4 committees, all the money committees zooming in today together. And then what we'll do is as you know, we will then make the rounds to each of the committees to do the Q&A. So for this session, there will not be any question and answers, but after this presentation at 3:15, we will be, Chris from RAND and the team will be zooming in, but Chris is in the building. We will be in House Appropriations doing a joint meeting with Senate Appropriations with Senate Finance. Then tomorrow, we will at 10 we'll be in House Appropriations, and then at 11:10 we'll be in House Ways and Means. So everyone will have an opportunity to sort of there'll be another, everyone will have an opportunity to get their questions answered. So just a reminder that Act 45, H171, for those who recall, of 2021 required our office to hire an outside consultant to do a child care and early childhood education financing study. And we hired RAND Corporation to do this study. And with that, I will turn it over to Chris Doss from RAND to start the presentation and to introduce his team. And I believe Senate Finance is joining us.
Great. Should I give them a few minutes to get situated before I start?
No, why don't we go ahead and get started, unless Senator Kitchell or Representative Lanfer or Representative Kornheiser want to say a few words real quick before they start. It's your call.
You know, we're here. I'll start the video. That's why.
Okay, great. 1 second, I'll start sharing my presentation.
Okay.
Nolan, how many committees are on getting this presentation now?
Currently, the 4 money committees will be are on at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome.
So
Okay,
why
great.
don't we get started?
Fantastic. Hopefully everybody can see the presentation. Let me know if not. But thank you all for inviting us to present the results of our Vermont early care and education financing study. We hope this presentation and the conversations that follow over the next 2 days can provide some critical guidance. I am Christopher Doss, a policy researcher at the RAND Corporation, a nonpartisan nonprofit research organization. I am joined via Zoom by my colleagues, Lynn Caroli and Aaron Strong. Lynn is a senior economist at RAND and is a leader in the early care and education field, particularly around the cost of early care. Aaron is a senior economist at RAND who specializes in the modeling of the effects of policy changes at the state and federal level. His work has been influential in guiding investments in California, Puerto Rico, and other states. This study comes at the heels of substantial investments already made by Vermont in early care and education, which we often abbreviate ECE. These investments in recent years have targeted 3 general areas. The first is making ECE more affordable by expanding the generosity and reach of public subsidies. Second, Vermont has expanded access to ECE through the establishment of the state-funded Universal Pre-Kindergarten Program that serves children 1 or 2 years before kindergarten entry. In Vermont, that program provides 10 hours of early education per week during the school year. Finally, Vermont has focused on improving quality of ECE through the Step Ahead recognition system, often abbreviated STARS. Despite these critical investments, many families still cannot afford the high cost of ECE and thus may not participate in high-quality programs. As one example, through the current subsidy system, though the current subsidy system is available to families that make up to 3.5 times the poverty level, there is not enough money in the system to provide subsidies for all eligible families. So further investments present us with 2 questions. What is going to be the cost of high quality ECE and how can it be paid for? This study seeks to estimate the answer to the first question while posing potential options to the second question. As Nolan said, the study was statutorily commissioned by Act 45. The parameters of Act 45 touch on some of the most pressing policy issues today. First, Act 45 acknowledges that ECE is intertwined with the broader Vermont economy and can be seen as an investment to support the economy. Second, it acknowledges that early educators face very low pay, and consideration should be given to pay that is commensurate with the required knowledge, skills, and competencies. Third, it acknowledges that this act builds off the advancements already made that we just delineated, including the redesign of the subsidies dispersed through the Child Care Financial Assistance Program, often called CCFAP. Our study has two components that correspond to the two objectives of the financing study delineated in Act 45. The first component aims to project the costs of expanding the state's ECE benefits to more families, requiring commensurate compensation for providers and utilizing a cost of care model to reimburse providers. This last point means that when estimating the cost of a high-quality ECE system, we will estimate the value of the resources required to provide high-quality services instead of relying on the prices charged by providers. The second component aims to identify feasible, stable, long-term funding sources for this expanded system and estimates the expected fiscal and economic impacts. This is a roadmap of today's presentation. We will begin by providing you background on the ECE system in Vermont to illustrate some of the underlying features that drive our approach and results. We will then provide an overview of the methods and key results of each study, taking each study in turn. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a broad overview of the Vermont ECE sector, the methodologies employed in the study, and the key findings from each study. We hope that this can set the stage for more detailed and substantive discussions with each of the interested committees. The report contains much more detail as well and is publicly available. Let's first start with some background on the ECE system in Vermont. Our study focuses on children from age 0 to kindergarten entry, a group we call preschool aged children. We group annual cohorts of children by kindergarten entry groups. At any point in time, for example, 4-year-olds is the group that will enter kindergarten in the next fall. During that pre-K year, some will have already turned 5. The 3-year-olds will enter kindergarten a year later. Again, this cohort will gradually turn 4 by the fall when they would enter pre-K. Vermont has about 5,800 children on average in each of these annual cohorts, or close to 30,000 preschool-aged children. As we talk about access to ECE and subsidies to help pay for the cost of care, we will refer to family income groups based on the ratio of family income to the poverty level. Much of our analyses focus on children and families with incomes up to 3.5 times poverty, which represents about 60% of preschool-aged children in Vermont. These are represented in the pie chart with the first 2 darker green pie slices. For reference, as of 2022, 3.5 times poverty corresponds to about $80,600 for a family of 3. This is the group of children that is currently eligible for subsidized ECE under CCFAP, again, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. We also consider expanding ECE subsidies for families with incomes up to 5 times poverty, which adds another 21% of this age group. As of 2022, 5 times poverty equates to $115,150 for a family of 3. For families with preschool-aged children, which is most families, about 71%, they have just 1 preschool-aged child. A few aspects of the landscape of Vermont's ECE providers are important to understand. We focus on regulated providers, namely licensed centers, Head Starts, and public school pre-K, and family child care homes, which we call a mixed delivery system of private and public providers. Vermont stands out for the relatively small size of most of its providers. Nearly 80% of centers, which are shown in the blue bars in the figures, have a maximum desired capacity of 40 children and represent just over half of all center or school-based slots. Family child care homes, which we often abbreviate FCCHs, they are represented by the red bars, have a maximum enrollment of 12 children. We account for this size distribution in estimating the per child hour cost of ECE. As noted earlier, Vermont has been investing in quality through the Step Ahead Recognition System, or STARS. This is the state's quality recognition and improvement system. Just over 80% of centers, again, the blue bars, have achieved the top rating of 4 or 5 stars. But this is the case for fewer than 30% of family child care homes again in the red bar. ECE educators in Vermont, like many areas of the country, have relatively low pay. The Bureau of Labor Statistics data for Vermont show that the average or median annual earnings is below $35,000 for childcare or preschool teachers, well below earnings for kindergarten or elementary school teachers. Yet the ECE field increasingly expects lead teachers to have a bachelor's degree, the same as public school teachers. These ECE workforce members are also less likely to have employer-provided benefits, such as health insurance and retirement plans. This issue of low compensation predates COVID, but has been made especially different to recruit and retain ECE staff as the state emerges from the pandemic economy. This is one reason why Act 45 required that the financing study assume a commensurate compensation level, which we do. There are three major funding sources in ECE as shown in the rows shaded in green. The first is federally funded Head Start and Early Head Start. The second is state-funded universal pre-K under Act 166. And the third is the CCFAP system, which is funded by a combination of federal and state monies. Smaller funding streams include federal and state tax credits for childcare, federal and state funding for subsidized ECE programs in 2018 and 2019 totaled approximately $109 million per year. You will see this figure later expressed in 2022 dollars, which is $125 million per year. Note that these estimates exclude funding for school-age children and funding for special needs preschoolers, two issues that we will return at the end of the presentation. CCFAP is a key part of Vermont's subsidy system and the main focus of our expansion of subsidies. In terms of the current system, Vermont is one of the most generous in that subsidies are available to families with incomes up to 3.5 times poverty, one of the highest levels in the country. There is also no contribution from families with incomes below 1.5 times poverty, and the family contribution does not vary with the number of children. The figure illustrates that the current subsidy schedule by plotting the family contribution as a share of family income along the income distribution up to 3.5 times poverty. The schedule varies depending on family size, so we show results for families of 3 and size 6 to capture the upper and lower bounds. For example, a family of size 3 with income of 2 times poverty will contribute 6% of their income towards ECE under CCFAP. This is the larger circle in that green line. And a family of size 6 with an income of 2 times poverty will contribute 4% of their family income, which is the larger circle on the purple line. The current subsidy structure means that some families of size 3 and also size 4 have family contributions that exceed 10% of their income, which we represent with the horizontal dashed line. As part of our analysis, we consider the same schedule, but with a cap of 10% of family income. With the long-term trend towards increasing women's labor force participation, it has become common for women with preschool-aged children to be employed or actively looking for work, albeit at a lower rate compared with their male counterparts. Vermont is no exception. The participation rates by parents with preschool-aged children at 84%, as seen in the first row. These parents represent about 10% of the current Vermont workforce of about 300,000 adults. And the 6,000 parents with young children who are not in the labor force, in other words, the potential new entrants, represent about 2% of the total workforce. It is the case that low-income parents with preschool-aged children, which is the group that's going to be targeted with the expanded subsidies, participate in the labor force at lower rates compared with their counterparts with higher income. As shown here, 78% of parents with preschool-aged children with incomes below 3.5 times poverty are in the labor force, compared with 93% of their counterparts with young children, but with incomes above that threshold. Even if the labor force participation rate for the lower income group matched the 93% rate of the higher income group, the labor force would increase by about 3,000 persons, or about 1% of the current labor force. We will provide the estimated number of new entrants into the labor market when presenting the results of study 2, but these figures help to contextualize these estimates. We now focus on our findings for study 1, presenting our approach and our key findings in 3 areas. First, the estimated cost of a quality ECE system in Vermont. Second, what families might be expected to contribute towards these costs. And third, what the gap would be for the public sector to fill. The cost study, or study one, involves quantifying 4 components as shown in this diagram. The 3 boxes with dashed lines are based on estimates that we generate, while the third box for the amount of public funding for ECE subsidies is based on the current system. That's that $125 million in 2022 dollars per year shown earlier. All other figures will also be in annual 2022 dollars. We discuss each of the dashed boxes in turn. For the first component represented in the top box, we estimate the aggregate Vermont-wide cost of ECE based on estimates from a cost model that assumes high-quality program features, including commensurate compensation, and then applies those cost estimates across the assumed hours of care for preschool-aged children in the state. Key assumptions for the cost estimates, which we now discussed, are the assumed quality features and the commensurate compensation for the ECE staff who work with children in the centers and family child care homes. This chart lists the key assumptions of what constitutes high quality in centers and family child care homes. One key cost driver is the ratio of children to adults and group sizes. For example, classrooms are assumed to have 2 adults, a lead teacher, and an assistant teacher, with up to 8 children for infants and toddlers, 10 children for 2-year-olds, and 20 children for preschoolers. The ratios we use in our models are consistent with accreditation and licensing standards. We also assume that lead teachers have a bachelor's degree in early childhood, while assistant teachers are assumed to have an associate's degree. This is a standard required in Head Start programs and most state-funded pre-K programs, and is consistent with accreditation standards. It reflects the expanding research evidence on the importance of supporting even the youngest learners in a whole child approach that requires early educators to have a deep knowledge of the science and practice of child development across multiple developmental domains. Our models also account for funds needed for professional development activities and other professional support services to help early educators advance their knowledge, skills, and competencies. Finally, our models assume other quality features such as evidence-based curriculum, developmental screeners, formative assessments, and independent assessments of quality. These quality features are all consistent with accreditation standards and a 5-star rating under the redesigned Vermont stars. Recall that the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for Vermont show median annual wages in 2019 of $30,000 to $35,000 for the ECE workforce. Consistent with Act 45, our cost model assumes that staff in high-quality ECE centers and family child care homes receive commensurate compensation with professionals in related fields, such as public school teachers. Drawing on efforts in Vermont to define commensurate compensation for the ECE workforce and similar efforts in other parts of the country, we define a salary schedule tied to qualifications and job role, such as being a lead teacher or an assistant teacher in a classroom. Because our assumptions about the lead teachers having a bachelor's degree and assistant teachers having an associate's degree, we use median wages shown here in 2022 dollars. These same earnings are assumed for family child care home providers. These assumed levels of cash salaries represent a substantial increase compared to the status quo, but are consistent with the expectations for knowledge, skills, and competencies in similar occupations such as kindergarten teachers. We also assume a commensurate package of fringe benefits consistent with the recent recommendations from the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children Advancing ECE as a profession task force. This includes employer contributions shared with the employee for health, dental, vision insurance, employer contributions for retirement, and short and long-term disability, and paid time off for 30 days of combined vacation, illness, and personal time off. We model these benefits as a 26% fringe benefit rate. Based on these assumptions about the resources needed for high-quality ECE, the commensurate compensation schedule, and estimates of the hours of care demanded, the estimated cost across all of Vermont's preschool-aged children for high-quality ECE with a well-compensated workforce is estimated to total about $645 million per year in 2022 dollars. This estimate includes system-level costs such as administrative costs, data systems, quality improvement supports, and workforce professional development. Our next step in our cost study is to estimate how much families would be expected to contribute towards these costs based on several subsidy schedules, just like we showed for CCFAP and the estimated use of care. This is represented by the second blue box. The study considers 5 potential sliding scale schedules for families to contribute towards the cost of ECE they use. The first schedule, shown in the green line, is the status quo schedule under CCFAP that we showed earlier for a family of size 3, except we extended the subsidy schedule up to 5 times poverty following a similar structure. Under this schedule, the family contribution for a family of 3 would reach about 17% of family income at 5 times poverty. These maximum family contribution shares would be lower for families of size 4 or higher. The second schedule imposes a 10% cap of 10% of family income up to 3.5 times poverty. As you see, the black dashed line does not exceed 10% of the family income. Between 3.5 and 5 times poverty, the family contribution resumes the same family contribution rate under Schedule 1. In aggregate, the schedule means that the total family contribution will be somewhat lower, so the public sector will have to fill that gap. In presenting results, we will focus on this schedule, Schedule 2, as it can be viewed as the one that's closest to what is described under Act 45. Under the third schedule with the red line, no family up to 5 times poverty pays more than 10% of family income. Thus, Schedule 3 will require even higher public contribution given the extended cap at 10%. Finally, we consider 2 more schedules that have families pay a fixed percentage regardless of size, and the percentage increases with family income. Under Schedule 4, which is the lighter blue line, the maximum share is under 10% for families with incomes up to 3.5 times poverty, but reaches a maximum of 15% at 5 times poverty. Schedule 5 reaches a maximum of 7% of family income at 3.5 times poverty and a maximum of 13% at 5 times poverty. Compared with Schedules 1 and 2, Schedules 4 and 5 will require even more of the public sector in contribution. As already noted, we focus on Schedule 2, shown here in the black dashed line, which differs from the status quo in capping the family contribution to 10% up to 3.5 times poverty, and then extends the schedule without a cap up to 5 times poverty. As we said before, we choose this schedule because we feel it most closely adheres to the spirit of Act 45. In the report, we provide information on all of these options. The options are also ordered from least to most generous. The status quo is therefore the least generous option, with Schedule 5 being the most generous option because lower family contribution shares are given in this option. As you will see, there is a direct correlation between generosity and the size of the gap. More generous schedules will create a larger funding gap that will need to be covered by public funds. This chart summarizes the family contribution based on the 5 subsidy schedules. In all cases, using the schedule up to 5 times poverty. As expected, family contributions are greatest under Schedule 1, which provides families with the least generous subsidies, and family contributions are lowest under Schedule 5, given the lower percentage shares of families that they would contribute. In considering these contributions, it's important to keep in mind 3 features of the subsidy schedules. First, all schedules maintain the current policy of requiring 0 family contribution when family income is below 1.5 times the poverty level. Second, contributions from families between 1.5 and 3.5 times poverty are capped at 10% or 7% of incomes for Schedules 2 through 5, depending on the schedule. Third, families with incomes of more than 5 times the poverty level would not be subsidized under the subsidy schedules considered in the study. Indeed, those families contribute to 162 million of the total family contribution amounts shown under each schedule. We focus on Schedule 2, where families in total would contribute 260 million per year towards the cost of care, or about 40% of the cost. That contribution from families with incomes under 5 times poverty would be about 100 million of that total. Note that if we assume Schedule 5, the most generous, families would contribute about $20 million less per year under Schedule 2, which means funding an additional 20 million in costs with public funds. In our accounting, we now show the estimate of 260 million per year for the family contribution under subsidy Schedule 2. And we retained our estimate of $125 million per year in current federal and state funding for preschool-aged children to subsidize ECE. In the final step, the estimate of the gap in funding that would be needed to be raised by additional state fund revenues is then computed as the residual after the family contribution and the existing public funds are subtracted from the total cost. The resulting gap under Schedule 2 is $258 million per year. Looking across the 5 subsidy schedules, the smallest gap estimates are about 179 million to 193 million per year, and retain the status quo of limiting subsidies to families making 3.5 times the poverty level or less. The larger gap estimates of 256 million to 279 million per year extend the subsidies to higher income families up to 5 times poverty. We will now turn to study 2. As in study 1, we'll provide a brief overview of the methods followed by the key findings. Key findings in this case are the potential funding sources and other fiscal and economic impacts. This component of the study takes findings from study 1, such as the gap in funding of each subsidy schedule, and proposes feasible and sustainable public revenue sources to fill that gap. Using these sources of funding and other outputs of study 1, we then model the effects of the Vermont economy over a 5-year time horizon and produce estimates of state net revenues, economic output, among others. The models we use have been implemented by RAND researchers in many other contexts and capture not only changes in the revenue to the state, but also how households and firms react to those changes in the economic landscape across all sectors of the Vermont economy, not just the ECE sector. This figure gives you a sense of how the model works. The model sees the Vermont economy as a circular system. Families pay taxes to the state government, which in turn distributes the money across different sectors. For example, the government provides money to the ECE sector through the subsidy system. This is in addition to money families pay directly to the ECE system through their family contributions. However, the ECE sector also provides wages to families in the system, who in turn pay taxes and may themselves pay for ECE services. Though this figure concentrates on the ECE sector, the model considers the entire Vermont economy in the same way. The key takeaway here is that changes in taxes, subsidies, or compensation has downstream effects that the model will capture. But also, effects such as changes in the labor force participation rate have to be looked at in terms of the overall economy, which this model also accounts for. We will return to this latter point later. You can see that each of the 3 major arrows in our previous diagram will be a source of a policy change in this study. Wages will increase for ECE workers, which will affect the amount of taxes that they pay, in addition to the changes in taxes that would come from implementing the funding instruments we propose. Of course, these increases in government revenue will be used to increase subsidies to families, which will flow to ECE providers. The first task of study 2 is to posit potential feasible, stable, and sustainable sources of funding. Though Act 45 asks for 3 possible sources, we provide a menu of 6 possible options. The first 4 options are what we call single source options, which use just one revenue source to cover the full gap. Possibilities include adding a payroll tax, increasing the sales and use tax, or adding services taxes. For the services taxes, we provide 2 options, taxing a limited or extended set of services. The limited set of services concentrates on personal services and equipment such as auto mechanics, household repairs, dry cleaning, and so on. The extended services include limited services, but then adds broadcasting and publishing, such as newspapers, magazines, radio, cable, TV, movies, etc. These last 2 options are what we call bundles and combines 3 sources of revenue. Each bundle option contains a soda tax and a hospitality tax, and then either a new payroll tax or an increase in the sales and use tax. We provide bundles as options to reduce the dependency on any one revenue source. We also considered other sources of funding. We considered adding a lottery in Vermont, but Vermont already has a lottery, and adding a second one will likely cause current participants to simply spread their current purchases across the new set of lottery options, not necessarily spend more. We also considered property taxes, but that system is complicated in Vermont and our data did not allow us to properly model such increases. Finally, we considered a novel tax on digital advertising that Maryland attempted to institute, but a Maryland Circuit Court recently struck that down. In the end, the charge of finding feasible and sustainable sources of revenues makes proposing novel revenue sources challenging for 2 reasons. Projecting the revenue is difficult without prior information, and the sustainability and stability is inherently unknown. Before we focus on proposed rates for these funding options, we want to benchmark approximately how much money the sources can raise. If we were to establish a 1% payroll tax, we would generate about $196 million per year in revenue for the government. The sales tax already exists, and if we were to increase that by 1 percentage point, we would produce $85 million per year in revenue. A 1 percentage point increase means raising the tax rate from the current 6% to 7%. Similarly, establishing a 6% tax on limited services would produce $105 million a year in revenue, while taxing the extended set of services will produce $143 million in revenue. Hospitality and soft drink taxes will produce less income. Increasing the hospitality tax by 1 percentage point, so for example, moving the meals tax from 9 to 10%, will bring in about $14 million per year. And establishing a soft drink tax of 15% will bring in $24 million per year. We obtained the soft drink tax amount based on what other jurisdictions, such as Philadelphia, do. As you may recall, Study 1 provided 6 subsidy schedules and the gaps they are likely to produce. In the report, we further break out the gaps within subsidy schedules to show how the gap grows as the subsidies are applied up the income ladder. For the purposes of this presentation, we show the options for Schedule 2. Recall this option caps family contributions 10% of their incomes for families making up to 3.5 times poverty. Fully implementing that schedule will produce a gap of approximately $258 million per year. Vermont may not be able to cover that full gap immediately, so we illustrate a situation where 25% of the gap is instituted in a year, so the policy is phased in over 4 years. With this approach, fewer people would be eligible for the study in earlier years, but in 4 years, all people covered by the scenario would receive a benefit. The first year, where 25% of the cap is incurred with $65 million, if option 1 is chosen, a payroll tax of 0.29% would cover the gap. If option 2 were chosen, the gap would require an increase in the sales tax of 0.66 percentage points. For option 3, we would need a limited services tax of 3.09%. And for option 4, we would need an extended services tax of 2.25%. The bundling options show decreases these amounts when combined. By the 4th year, when the full $258 million gap is incurred, a payroll tax of 1.14%, an increase in the sales tax of 2.64 percentage points, a limited services tax of 13.6%, or an extended services tax of 9.65% will cover the full gap. Again, the bundles reduced the increases in any one type of tax. The results presented here pose a few key takeaways. First, the smallest gap estimates based on maintaining the status quo of subsidizing families up to 3.5 times the poverty level can be covered by a single source of revenue. The gap estimate is on the order of $190 million, can be covered by a 0.9% payroll tax, a 2 percentage point increase in the sales tax, a new limited services tax of 9.9%, or an expanded services tax of 7.1%. Again, using bundling options will reduce the tax level of any one source. However, the larger gaps generated by expanding subsidies to higher income families cannot be funded by a single source without rates that are larger than what is seen in other states. In those cases, the bundles are the most feasible options. In all cases, even with the taxes needed to cover the highest gaps, the effect on household economic well-being is small. Of course, the options presented here and in the report are merely potential options. Vermont can use our estimates as a starting point for creating other bundles of taxes or for funding other subsidy schedules. A key feature of our model is that it takes into account the effects of the expected increase in the labor force participation rate. As we stated in Study 1, the structure of the Vermont labor force constrains the possible number of new workers that will be expected to be induced to work because of the policy. Our models indicate that we can expect between 612 and 2,800 people to enter the labor market, depending on the subsidy schedule adopted and other assumptions. These estimates are less than 1% of the labor force. When taking into account all the economic benefits of this potential increase in the number of workers, we anticipate 59 million to 218 million more a year in gross state product and $1.5 to $18 million per year more in additional state and local tax revenue. It's important to note that these are liberal estimates that assume all these workers will enter the labor market. This is optimistic for a variety of reasons. First, though these workers may start looking for jobs, there is no guarantee that all will find jobs, and it may result in increases in the unemployment rate. Second, these jobs may simply reshuffle some current workers from one sector to the other. Reshuffling of workers does not result in a net increase in the labor force participation. Finally, to juxtapose the increases in gross state products with the gaps, our largest gaps estimates, which are on the order of $255 to $279 million a year, or about 0.6% of gross state product, or about 2.8% of yearly appropriations. We want to leave you with a few additional considerations to help you contextualize our results. First, the 2019 data for baseline estimates of demographics, ECE program spending, and other parameters in our cost and economic models. First, we use 2019 data because that is the last full year of data before the pandemic. It's important to note that data from the pandemic era would not be representative of the pre or post-pandemic era and could lead to erroneous conclusions. We also do not try to model the new normal because of the uncertainty of what that would look like. Perhaps this past year is the first year of the new normal, but that data are not yet available. However, to make the numbers more useful in the current environment, we inflate the numbers to 2022 dollars. Second, our estimates are at state level and not disaggregated by region. For example, rural or versus urban, because that data are too limited to accurately make these distinctions. However, some features that differ across the regions are accounted for in our model. For example, Vermont has a high share of small ECE centers, in part because a substantial part of the state is rural, with less densely populated areas that can only support small centers. Small centers cost more on a per-child basis because the overhead cannot be spread out across a higher enrollment. This has been accounted for in our models. Finally, our results are indicative of what you can expect in the long run with a stable, expanded ECE system in place. Though we do not model the transition, we do provide phase-in funding possibilities. Further, our models do not explicitly account for the additional costs associated with providing ECE for preschool-age children with special needs. Estimates indicate that about 10% of children would be identified with special needs prior to the kindergarten entry. But the range of needs is variable, making it difficult to estimate the additional cost of serving these children. These children are included in our cost estimates at the same cost as their typically developing peers. Other estimates suggest that adding costs beyond the high-quality features we already assume, for example, teacher compensation levels that would allow for hiring teachers with an early childhood special education degree, may be on the range of 10%. That increment applied to 10% of children at these ages implies a total cost of 1%, which we have not accounted for. Further, we have not counted the federal and state funds used to pay for preschool education in our estimates of funds in the current system. Thus, those funds are available to pay for the additional costs of meeting the ECE needs of these children. We also do not explicitly model after-school care for school-age children. Using prior estimates of the cost of school-age care and the funding already in the system suggests that the subsidy system to include school-age care would likely add another 10% to our estimates of the gap. Finally, research shows that there is potential for downstream benefits to children and society from expanding ECE access and quality. These benefits are realized as children progress through school-age years and enter society. They are well beyond the 5-year time horizon of the study, and therefore we could not account for them. In that sense, such longer-term benefits are underestimated in this study. Thank you very much for your time and attention. The full report is publicly available on RAND's website at the URL shown here.
Great. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And as mentioned, we will be doing a Q&A. We will be in Senate Appropriations to do the Q&A with Senate Finance and Senate Appropriations at 3:15. And then House Appropriations will be over at your place at 10 o'clock tomorrow. And the Ways and Means will be in your committee from 11 to 10. So we look forward to hearing your questions. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I don't know if the chairs have any final remarks before we sign off.
Tomorrow.
What's that?
I wanted to say thank you. This is Representative Lanfer in House Appropriations. Just want to say thank you. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Great.
I need to make sure we've got enough space